Good morning, everyone. I hope everybody wasn't confused on the time. There was a couple different times that went out. So this is the 10 o'clock webinar on the I smell gas, carbon monoxide, and out of gas calls. As you can see on the right-hand side, you should have a chat box. If you have any questions, you can put them in there. If there's other questions afterwards or during, you can email me or call and text me. My information's in that chat box, and I will also have it at the very end here and leave that slide up when we get done. So those of you that don't know me, my name's Zach Bauer. I'm the Propane Marketing and Technical Services Manager at Growmark. This training was requested, and it's very good that everybody in the FS system is all on the same page on how we should respond to I smell gas calls, out of gas calls, and carbon monoxide calls. So take about 20 minutes to go through this presentation. Like I said, at any point you have questions, throw it in the chat box there, or email, call, text me, and I'll answer your questions that way. So we'll get started here. So to start out, we're just going to cover the basics of propane. Propane is tasteless, colorless, and naturally odorless. It's flammable when mixed with the proper amount of air, and it can be in a liquid or a vapor state. It's stored and transported in a liquid state, except for in a vapor pipeline distribution system. So when it's going down the road in the transport tanks, or when it's sitting in a customer's house or a customer's business, it is in a liquid form when it's in that tank. It's compressed liquid. It readily vaporizes at atmospheric pressure at moderate ambient temperatures, greatly expanding in volume. The liquid propane expands when heated, creating pressure in the container. That is why tanks are only filled to 80% capacity to allow for expansion in warmer temperatures. Propane vapor is heavier than air, so it will drop to the ground if there is a leak. Odorants. So as I mentioned earlier, propane is tasteless, odorless, and colorless. So ethyl mercaptan is added, so it gives it the rotten egg smell. It's the most common odorant, and it's added at the rate of 1 pound per 10,000 gallons of propane. Your average transport semi-trailer going down the road is going to have 92 to 9,400 gallons of propane on it. So that would be about a pound of ethyl mercaptan in those loads. Odorization helps to warn of leaks and in locating and fixing leaks, and reduces gas losses by warning of leaking pipes, fittings, and storage containers. NFPA 58, which is the code book for propane, and DOT require that LP gas must be odorized at a concentration in air so that gas is readily detectable by a person with a normal sense of smell. So somebody that's been on a propane truck for 5 years isn't going to have as good of a sense of smell of it, most likely. So that's why it's stated as it is. We're not going to cover all these, just a couple of the more important ones. Something that's kind of neat on here, the boiling point is negative 44 degrees Fahrenheit. What that means is you could carry liquid propane around in a bucket if it was negative 44 out. So then the other two important numbers on here, the lower flammability limit and the upper flammability limit. So the lower is 2.15, upper is 9.6. That's where that percentage in air needs to be to make combustion. So it's a much less volatile fuel than diesel fuel or gasoline would be. So this slide here shows basic components of the propane system. We're not going to cover the under the lid part here. I have a better slide of that in a minute, but what I wanted to show on here is you can see on the dome on the propane tank, the line comes out, goes down and goes in the ground, runs across the ground, comes up, then it goes into a second stage regulator, which then goes into the house and goes to the appliance. So that first stage regulator is taking the vapor, the propane vapor, which is what your appliances in your house are running on, from tank pressure, which could be all over the place. This time of year, it's around 50 or 60 PSI when it's colder normally. But it takes it from that down to 10 PSI. Then it runs at 10 PSI or thereabouts across the yard and up to the second stage regulator. At the second stage regulator, then it turns it into around 14 inches of water column. And that is even lower, so that is the pressure that your appliances are running at. This is the better picture I was talking about, the top of a propane tank. So we'll talk about these items on the right side, starting at the top. liquid withdrawal valve or the check lock, that is where if you needed to pull liquid for a grain dryer or something that needed liquid, if you're going to a vaporizer, that's where we would pull the liquid from. There's a tube that runs all the way to the bottom of the tank. It spares about an inch or so it's not stuck in shavings and things off the bottom, but that's where you pull liquid from. Moving down the tank, you can see where it says face/float gauge. That is also known as the percentage gauge. So when a customer calls in, you ask them a percentage, that's the gauge they need to read. And some tanks will have 2 gauges on them. So if you see exactly where that arrow is pointing to, where it says service valve, that's another port for a pressure gauge. A lot of times, what I would always tell customers is you want to read the gauge that is flush with the tank, and it goes from 5 to 95, where your pressure gauge is going to go all the way up to 300. So that's a good way to tell the difference between the two. The service valve, that is where the regulator hooks up to. That's where the product comes out of the tank. You can see there's the silver or gray colored hand wheel. We'll discuss that in a second, but that's where you'll turn that tank on and off at. Moving on down, the manufacturer's nameplate, could also be known as a data plate, just has tank information on it. There's an example of one on the next slide. The fill valve there actually has a plastic wrap around this one, but it's going to have a yellow most of the time, sometimes a black cap on it. That's where the bobtail driver will hook onto to fill the tank. And then the safety relief valve at the very bottom, that is designed to where if that pressure gets too high in that tank, that will relieve pressure. So it'll relieve, then close back up. When it gets safe, when it's safe pressure, it's hot again, it releases and closes back up. A lot of times, if you've seen a fire scene before, there'll be someone, one of the firemen that just has a hose directly on the propane tank the whole time. And what he's trying to do is keep that tank cool, to keep that relief valve from relieving. When it relieves, it's doing what it's supposed to do. That's the safety feature. But in the fire situation, they're trying to keep that tank cool and keep that vapor under control that's inside that pressurized container. Like I mentioned, here's a picture on the left is of a data plate or nameplate. And then on the right, the red piece of equipment there is the first stage regulator that we talked about. You can see that copper line, or in the industry we call it a pigtail or a hogtail. This one here looks like a hogtail to me. It's just a little bigger. It goes into the service valve. The hand wheel on the very bottom right is where you turn it on and off. You'll turn it to the right to close it, turn it counterclockwise, or to the left to open it. Far right, again, is the percentage gauge. This tank looks like it's around 50 or 60%. And then on the far left side, that again is the fill valve where the bobtail driver will fill the tank at. So how would you instruct a customer to turn off the supply of gas? Tank service valve operation. So like I said, operation of the propane tank service valve is similar to that of a water faucet. The operational part of the valve consists of a hand wheel that closes and opens the gas flow by turning the wheel clockwise and counterclockwise. So there'll be a few different, they won't all look exactly like this, but same thing. They're all going to look similar to a water spigot, and it's always to the right to shut them off, to the left to open them. This will be more for the guys that are out on the truck that are sitting on this webinar, but we try to discourage customers from looking over the top of the relief valve. And when I mentioned earlier, that thing release, it sounds like a shotgun going off, and you have extreme pressure of propane coming out of that. And so it's just good to mention not to look over the relief valve. We talked about the float gauge earlier. It's used to verify the percentage of the tank, and it's not to be used to fill the tank or to use the 80% spitter gauge. And so here on the left, you can see that's what the gauge looks like that's in the tank. It's just got a float on it with a set of gears, and it comes up and runs the needle that shows the percentage of the tank. The picture on the right just shows different options of what tank gauge faces might look like. They're come in all different shapes and sizes and looks, but you can see here they're all going from 5 to 95. All right, so moving on to gas leak or odor complaint calls. Gas leak calls should be classified as priority service calls. What should be done when a customer says they smell gas in their home? First off, anytime we ever get a odor complaint or a gas leak, it takes priority over everything. We have to assume every time that it is a propane leak. The person receiving the call should ask the caller for specific information. The person receiving the call should instruct the customer to evacuate the structure and to keep persons clear of the leak area. The customer should also be instructed not to turn off any electrical switches, do not hang up a landline phone, and do not light any sources of ignition. If a possible leak exists, a service technician should be dispatched immediately. And like I said a minute ago, if they call, then there's a possible leak. So anytime we get a call, the service tech should be dispatched immediately. And probably the most important thing on this slide is where it says to instruct the customer to evacuate the structure and keep the persons clear of the leak area. So there was an instance in the United States where someone called, said they smelled gas. The person answering the phone said, okay, get out. They didn't tell them to stay out or don't go back in until it's been cleared. Maybe we shouldn't have to tell them that, but we do have to tell them that every time. The person answering the phone called and dispatched the service tech. The person went back in before the service tech got there. The house blew up. So if we're not telling these people what they need to do, what we need to tell them, to get out, stay out, don't turn off any electric switches or on any electric switches, those type of things, then we're not doing our job to a full extent. When receiving, responding to, and documenting a gas odor or leak report, always apply your company's policy and procedures. So all the retail divisions have to run on Grillmark's policy manual, and most of the member companies are doing the same, and especially on this portion, these parts of the policy manual. So we're going to run through those. Any gas leak becomes serious when there's an insufficient amount of air for dilution and or where the leak is allowing so much gas to escape that the mixture becomes combustible. Because company personnel have no way of knowing the nature of the leak or how much gas has escaped, the technician must always use basic precautions and rules. Again, all leak reports should be treated as propane gas until proven otherwise. If an odor has been detected, assume it is a combustible mixture and treat it accordingly. Take precautions to prevent the ignition of the mixture. All persons except gas service technicians and emergency responder personnel should remain clear of the area. Again, hitting on that, get them out or tell them to get out and stay out. So this is just a screenshot out of the policy manual, and you guys should all have 4 forms that were sent to you. We'll go over the first one here in just a second, the responding to an odor complaint, which is this form. So at the top here, you're just going to get date, time, person reporting the leak, location, address of reported leak, and employee taking the call. That location address might seem minuscule. If you know their name, you know where they're at, but that's not necessarily the case. There's lots of customers that have multiple locations or rent houses or what have you, so it's important to get that specific information. So then you're going to start asking these questions, and you'll ask a few here, and then you'll get to if the answer is yes to any of the above, then you'll jump down to the statement. So what I'm going to do is just read through the questions, and then I'll read the statement at the end. Do you hear gas escaping inside the building? Do you smell gas throughout the building? Has a line been damaged? Have any appliances been moved or disconnected? Again, if they said yes to any of those, then you go to the statement below. Do you have a pilot out on any appliance? Do you smell gas at this or all the time? Excuse me. If yes, how long have you smelled the odor? And that might seem like something that's crazy too, but multiple times we'll get a call and they'll say, "Oh, we've been smelling it for 2 or 3 days." Unfortunately, that's the nature of our business, but we try to prevent that by letting them know how important it is to let us know immediately if they smell it when with duty to warn or just a conversation when our propane guys are out there with the customers. So then moving to the outside questions, is there an odor or a suspected leak near any building? And is there any gas odor in any building? And again, if they answered yes to either of those 2 questions, then you could jump down to the statement. Has any construction work or grading been done in the area? Do you hear gas escaping? Is the odor or suspected leak in the yard or is it in the street? How long have you smelled the odor? And then the statement is, from the information you have provided, I'm requested to advise you to immediately evacuate the structure or area to a safe distance, extinguish all smoking materials and open flames or sources of ignition. Do not operate any electrical switches, appliances, or thermostats. Do not use your house telephone. If you're now on your house telephone and it's connected to an outlet, set it down. Do not hang it up. Exit the structure area and call us from another telephone from a safe area. Do not attempt repairs. That's huge too. Many times people try to repair their own stuff, and this is way too dangerous to be trying to attempt to repair if you're not qualified or trained to do that safely. Once everyone is outside, and if it is safe to do so, you should turn off the service valve on the propane supply container. It says we're at the meter. Most of ours are going to be right at the tank. Service technician will be dispatched to your location immediately. And then this last one, do not allow anyone except qualified gas professionals or emergency response personnel to enter the building until a complete inspection has determined if there is a gas leak. And if so, that the building has been properly ventilated and that the leak is repaired. Again, I keep stressing how important that is, but it's very important that we read everything in this statement. We don't skip over anything. We read it exactly as it's stated, and they know this. And then we ask, do you understand these instructions? And then put yes. And then below, we're asking for a telephone number that can be reached at after everyone's evacuated. And the reason that's at the bottom is so they don't give you a phone number that's a landline before we tell them that landline will not be a good form of communication. So that's why the telephone number is at the bottom there. All right, moving along. Characteristics of carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide, or CO, is a non-irritating, highly toxic gas. It's a byproduct of incomplete combustion, not enough air to complete the burning process. Factors to consider when investigating a carbon monoxide situation include it has no odor, color, or taste, so it can't be detected by bodily senses. It's flammable and has a wider range of flammability than propane. And harmful effects of exposure increase over time of exposure. So when responding to service calls that involve carbon monoxide, it's important to adhere to your company's policy and procedures. Again, this is a screenshot right out of the policy manual, and here's the form, which you should also have. One thing I'm going to touch on before we go through this is one of the bullet points below. It states your company does not employ trained qualified professionals for completing a CO analysis of the structure. Well, basically what that's saying is we don't have anybody that's qualified to tell them that they're safe to go back in, that CO level is at a safe level that they can go back in. What we're doing here is just gathering information, and then we're going to get that to the emergency personnel that could be there at the scene. A lot of times your HVAC guys or your local fire department will have air meters, gas meters that can check this, and they can do a CO analysis and tell them if it's safe to go back in. But again, we aren't trained. We don't want to be trained to be able to tell them that they're safe to go back in. So we'll leave that up to the HVAC guys and the emergency personnel. But we'll run through this form real quick. Date, time, caller's name, location, addresses, suspected CO or alarm sounding, the follow-up number after they exit the building, your name, whoever's taking the call, are any of the occupants feeling ill, which symptoms are they experiencing, and then you're going to read them this information. Cardiac patients are the most susceptible to CO poisoning and may experience chest pains. The symptoms of moderate CO poisoning are similar to those of the flu, and CO poisoning can be misdiagnosed. Advise all occupants to exit the building. Advise occupants that individuals who show symptoms of CO poisoning be examined on the scene by EMS or appropriately trained personnel. If medical treatment is indicated, then the occupant should be taken to the appropriate medical facility. Then we're advising the caller again that our company does not employ trained, qualified individuals for completing a CO analysis of the structure. Recommend they call the local fire department, emergency responders, or a trained service person to perform the CO analysis of the structure. Then advise the caller that occupants should not go back inside until a qualified professional has inspected the conditions inside the home and authorized re-entry. Then ask if they understand these instructions. And then the follow-up there, dispatch to, you can still get this information to the service tech. A lot of times they're going to go out on this call as well. We're just not, the FS employee is not the one that's going to say it's okay to go back in. Then the out of gas form. It's important that each time a customer calls in that is out of gas, an out of gas form is filled out and put in the customer file or in a master file. It is recommended that a copy also be given to the delivery person in charge of making the delivery. So we should handle all out of gas calls as a possible leak. This is why a leak check must be performed when there is an out of gas situation. So when someone calls and says, hey, I'm out of gas, we have to inspect every time that they're out of gas because there was a gas leak and not because they just ran out. We all have the customers that, hey, they ran out 3 times this year or 2 times this year already. And, I know it's just that's what it is. It's not a leak. They just ran out. And then you go fill the tank, don't do the leak check, the house explodes. They have loss of life or definitely loss of property. So we want to make sure that we're handling these out of gas calls as possible leaks every time. And the form on the right here, I think I have just a second here. Yeah, the form on the right, we'll run through it real quick. It's what to document when someone calls and reports an out of gas. Date, time, employee taking the call, the caller's name, address, and phone number. It's so important to get a phone number so that we can, the drivers can get a hold of the person, the customer. Address of the tank if it's different than the caller's address. The percentage. Now that might seem weird because it's an out of gas form, but it's always good to ask for that. There's times where people call and think they're out of gas and they go out there and they're not. So that doesn't mean that we don't need to go out there and check it because something's going on with their system, but it's just additional information for that driver or service tech that's going to be going out there and checking it out. Time someone will be home for delivery. Like I said, if they're out of gas, we have to do a leak check. And if we have to do a leak check, we have to be able to gain access to the structure to light the pilot to make sure everything's going good again. So that's important. Is there a propane smell present? If they say yes, then you're going to go through that responding to odor complaint form that we talked about earlier. If no, then you're just going to follow the out of gas procedures in the manual. You can advise the customer to close the service valve in the container, and then put on there who you turn that over to. Did you send it to the service tech or the driver, or did you send that order to? And with that takes care of the presentation portion of the webinar. Is anybody checking the chat here? I don't see any questions on the chat. Like I said, if anybody has any questions, my contact information is there on the screen, and I'll answer your questions however we need to get them answered. I appreciate everybody taking the time out this morning to get on the call. And like I said, it's important that we're all on the same page, and so hope you got something out of the webinar, and stay safe and have a great day.